At 2:16 a.m., I received a message from an unknown number. It simply read, "Your husband is in my bed. He chose me because I'm better." That night, something inside me broke, and something far more dangerous woke up. If you've ever been underestimated, humiliated, or betrayed by someone you trusted, this story is for you. Subscribe now, because what you're about to hear isn't just revenge, it's strategy, power, and poetic justice served cold. Let's begin. The message came at exactly 2:16 a.m., slicing through the silence of my bedroom like a knife. I had been drifting somewhere between sleep and the echo of Julian's usual excuses, another late night at the firm, Elena. Big case. Big client. It was the same line I'd heard 100 times. I almost believed it every time. But when my phone buzzed, I knew, before I even read it, that something was wrong. The glow of the screen hurt my eyes as I reached for it on the nightstand. Unknown number. And then. "Hey Elena. Just thought you should know, your darling husband is in my bed tonight. He chose me because I'm better. In every way. Sleep tight, winky face, Camilla." For a second, I couldn't move. My hands trembled, but I couldn't put the phone down. The words burned through me, line by line, like acid seeping into every pore of my body. He wasn't at the firm. He wasn't fighting for a client. He was tangled in the sheets with her. Camilla Torres. The same perfectly curated woman who sat across from me at the firm's holiday party 2 months ago, sipping champagne and pretending to admire my shoes. The same one who made Julian laugh a little too easily. The rage hit me before the grief. A punch in the stomach. I clutched the phone so tightly my knuckles turned white. My breath came in shallow, angry bursts. Tears welled in my eyes, but I didn't cry. Not yet. Instead, I stared at the words again and again, as if rereading them would change what they said. It didn't. I was being mocked. Ridiculed. Publicly, gleefully discarded like yesterday's news. For a moment, I considered calling Julian, screaming, accusing, unraveling right there on the phone. But something in me refused. That part of me, naive, hopeful, willing to believe in him, had been murdered by Camilla's smug message. What replaced it was colder. Sharper. I got out of bed with a strange sense of clarity, my bare feet silent on the hardwood floor. The air was icy, but I felt nothing. I turned on the lamp and caught a glimpse of myself in the mirror. My eyes were bloodshot, my cheeks hollowed by sleepless weeks of pretending everything was fine. But there was a glint in my reflection I hadn't seen in years. I picked up the phone and typed out a reply. "Enjoy tonight, Camilla. It's the last one you'll ever have with him. Because by tomorrow, I'll take everything. His reputation. His money. His future. You'll be left with nothing but each other's lies." I hit send. A quiet thrum of satisfaction stirred inside me as I imagined her reading those words. Let her enjoy her little victory lap. Let her gloat. Because I wasn't the woman who begged or pleaded. I was the woman who planned. And this was war. Julian Moreau had chosen her. He'd made that decision. So I would make mine, would take everything from him, and anyone who helped him break me. I opened my laptop and typed in a name I hadn't searched in years. Marcus Flint. Private investigator. Boston, ****. He was the man who helped a friend of mine during her ex-husband's scandal. He found the mistress, the hidden funds, and even the burner phones. I clicked call. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. Flint Security. "Marcus," I said, forcing my voice to stay calm. "It's Elena Moreau. I need your help. Tonight." There was a pause. Then, what did that bastard do? I exhaled slowly. He cheated. With a woman from his firm. Her name's Camila Torres. I'll start tonight, he said. Send me everything you know. Where they work. His car. Her address, if you have it. I'll get you everything, I said, already gathering Julian's firm information from our shared iCloud. I assume discretion is key. Marcus asked. I smiled for the first time that night. No, Marcus. I want them to know it was me. But not until it's too late to stop it. We ended the call. The silence returned, but it wasn't the same. It was focused now. Cold. Tactical. I made tea, though I didn't drink it. I stared at our wedding photo on the kitchen wall, Julian smiling, holding my waist, looking like the man who promised me forever. I studied it like a blueprint. A crime scene. Every smile now looked like a lie. The next morning, I called my best friend Lena. She had been with me through everything, my promotion, my miscarriage, my mother's cancer. I told her everything. Lena didn't hesitate. What do you need? Lawyers. The kind that make men cry. And someone who can freeze his assets before he even realizes he's been served. Done, she said. We burn him to the ground. I didn't cry. Not that day. Not when I handed Marcus the access to Julian's shared email account. Not when I canceled Julian's supplementary credit card. Not when I moved half of our investment accounts into a private trust under my maiden name. But I did when Lena sent me a text that night, with nothing but a single sentence. You're not alone in this war. My body folded in on itself as I sat on the floor. The weight of everything, the betrayal, the plan, the fear, it finally cracked me. But only for a moment. I wiped my tears. Pulled myself up. I had work to do. Julian thought he could break me with betrayal. He had no idea I was building a case that would break him, publicly, legally, completely. And as for Camila, she would learn that being better comes with a price. One she could never afford. Tomorrow, the war would begin. Tonight, I smiled for the first time and meant it. The morning sun cast long shadows across the hardwood floors of my home, the home Julian and I had bought together 5 years ago, filled with dreams, laughter, and, apparently, lies. As the light touched the framed photos on the wall, I wondered how many of those smiles were real. How many were taken while he was already slipping away, mentally preparing excuses for late nights that were never about work. I didn't let myself spiral. Not today. Today, I went to war. By 9 a.m., Marcus Flint had already sent his first report. Camila Torres wasn't just sleeping with my husband, she had a history. Her last job ended in a non-disclosure agreement and quiet payout after an HR conflict. The partner she was involved with back then was married, too. It seemed betrayal was Camila's professional sport, and Julian was her latest gold medal. But I wasn't angry anymore. Not in the way I had been. My emotions were precise now, filed sharp like weapons. I pulled up our joint bank accounts. Julian and I had amassed a respectable portfolio, real estate, crypto, stocks, a vacation home in Maine, all of it under dual access. I was the one who handled most of the finances. He always said I was better at numbers. Ironic, considering he couldn't count the cost of what he was about to lose. I didn't drain the accounts, not yet. That would be too obvious, too soon. Instead, I began making investments, safe transfers into irrevocable trusts under my maiden name. Quiet moves that didn't set off alarm bells but would make any financial split in divorce proceedings lean heavily in my favor. That afternoon, Lena connected me with a family law attorney named Tessa Nguyen. A woman with a courtroom reputation so ruthless, even other attorneys flinched when they saw her walk in. She met me in her office, sleek glass walls, modern, cold, efficient. Perfect. Tessa didn't smile. She didn't need to. She listened to my story without blinking, took notes, and then slid a thick file toward me. "Here's what we'll do," she said. "We file a divorce petition with a fault-based cause, infidelity, cruelty, reputational damage. You already have a private investigator building evidence. Good. We'll time the filing to maximize strategic disruption. Think, right before Julian's next major case hearing. While he's at peak exposure. And the money?" I asked. "We'll subpoena his firm's internal bonuses, hidden 401k structures, any shell companies he's funneled assets through. You'll get the house. The main property. The luxury SUV he thinks is in his name, it's not. You'll walk away with 70%, if not more." I was stunned. "Can we really prove all that?" Tessa leaned forward, her tone steely. "We don't prove. We prepare. And when he tries to bluff his way through this, we make him fold." By the time I left her office, I wasn't just a woman betrayed. I was a weapon, loaded with legal ammunition and a trigger finger twitching with control. That night, Marcus sent me a photo. Julian and Camilla. At a wine bar on Clarendon Street. Her hand on his knee. His lips brushing her ear. I stared at the image and made a choice. I sent the picture to Julian with no caption. Nothing. Just silence. Let him sweat. Minutes passed. Then, finally, he replied. "It's not what it looks like. I can explain." I didn't answer. I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. Let him wonder how much I knew. Let paranoia eat at him the way betrayal had eaten at me. The next day, Marcus called. "You're not going to like this," he said. "Try me. Julian transferred $75,000 from your shared business account into a private fund, yesterday. Camilla's name is on it." I felt the floor fall out beneath me. "He's hiding money." "He's trying," Marcus corrected. "But I traced it. And now we have documentation." "Want me to dig deeper?" "Find everything. I want every cent. I want to make sure when I leave him, he's the one applying for financial aid." I was playing chess now. Not checkers. And I was several moves ahead. I knew Julian wouldn't go quietly. He was too polished, too calculating. He would try to charm his way out. Gaslight me. Maybe even cry. But I was no longer the Elena who believed in teary apologies and flowers after fights. I was building a fortress. And every new discovery was another brick in the wall. 3 days later, I walked into his firm's office unannounced. I wore all black, high heels, a power suit, a minimalist gold chain that rested right above my collarbone. Under my arm was a folder. In it, printed emails, transaction screenshots, photos of him and Camilla. Proof. The receptionist's smile faded as I approached. "I'm here to see Julian Moreau." She glanced at the time. "Does he know?" "Tell him Elena's here. He'll understand." 5 minutes later, he emerged. Polished. Nervous. "Elena. What are you?" "I suggest we talk privately," I said. His jaw clenched, but he led me into a vacant conference room. I placed the folder on the table between us. "I know," I said. Julian swallowed, the color draining from his face. "I never meant to hurt you." I said nothing. He opened the folder. As he flipped through the photos, the screenshots, the emails with Camilla, one line stood out, typed in all caps. "She's so uptight. I feel free with you." Julian looked up, eyes glassy. Please, Elena. Let's talk about this. I already did, I replied. With my lawyer. With my forensic accountant. And with your firm's managing partner. His face froze. You went to. Did you think you could violate the ethics clause in your contract and keep your job? I leaned forward, whispering. This affair doesn't just cost you your wife. It costs you your future. He stood, hands shaking. You wouldn't. I already did. As I walked out, I passed Camilla in the hallway. She was on the phone, her voice low, panicked. Maybe she had gotten the same call from HR that Julian just received. I didn't speak. But I looked her in the eye, and I smiled. Let her know exactly who she underestimated. Back at home, I poured myself a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and sent Marcus a final request. I want surveillance on Camilla's past employers. I want whispers, scandals, NDAs. Everything. You're sure? Marcus asked. Yes. She started this war. I'm just making sure she doesn't walk away from it. Julian tried to humiliate me. Camilla tried to gloat. But I wasn't broken. I was awake now. And I was just getting started. Camilla Torres was the type of woman who curated her entire existence like an Instagram feed, every detail perfectly polished, every flaw airbrushed out of sight. Her life looked effortless from the outside, designer handbags, gala invitations, articles quoting her as the up-and-coming star of corporate law. But what people didn't know, what I was about to show them, was that Camilla's empire was built on secrets, seduction, and sabotage. And I had every intention of turning that glossy image into ash. Marcus Flint didn't disappoint. 3 days after I gave him the green light, he delivered a manila envelope thicker than the divorce petition I'd filed. Inside were documents, screenshots, anonymous whistleblower emails. It was a dossier of destruction. Camilla had burned bridges in 3 cities before landing in Boston. At her previous firm in Seattle, a married partner was quietly demoted after a conflict of interest. Months later, Camilla left, just before an internal audit found discrepancies in client billing that could never be traced back to anyone, officially. But in Marcus's file, there was an anonymous email, most likely from a former paralegal, describing how Camilla manipulated junior associates into adjusting invoice logs. She didn't just cheat in relationships. She cheated for sport. I wanted to make sure the right people saw that. I began with an anonymous tip to her current firm's ethics board. A carefully phrased message with a Dropbox link containing years of digital breadcrumbs Marcus had uncovered. Camilla thought deleting emails protected her. She had no idea metadata was forever. Next, I scheduled a call with Richard Amaze, one of the senior partners at the firm. I had met him at a charity function once. He liked control, appearances, and above all, loyalty. I knew he wouldn't like what I had to say. Richard, I said coolly, I wanted to speak to you as a professional courtesy. You'll want to review what's happening inside your firm, before the press does. His silence was sharp. He understood. 24 hours later, Camilla's picture was removed from the company website. 2 days later, her LinkedIn changed to currently seeking opportunities. But that wasn't enough. I didn't want her just unemployed. I wanted her uninvited, blacklisted from the very circles she used to charm her way into. So I called Harper Bell, editor of Beacon Women, a publication that once listed Camilla in their 30 under 30. I offered a quiet scoop, on background, of course. Why would I print that? Harper asked. Camilla's always been a darling of our readership. Because you'll be first, I said. And when the lawsuits hit, you'll be the one who got the story right, before it broke everywhere else. I sent her the file. She didn't call back, but she didn't have to. The next morning, Beacon Women ran a quiet but devastating op-ed, "When ambition crosses the line, the hidden cost of winning at all costs." Camilla's face wasn't on the cover, but those in the know saw right through the anonymity. Her friends stopped posting with her. Sponsors retracted. But I still wasn't finished. Julian, ever the optimist, or fool, was still trying to control the narrative. He had called me 4 times, each voicemail more desperate than the last. "Elena, please. Let's meet. I was stupid, I know. But we can fix this." No. We couldn't. There was no fixing what he had broken. Instead of responding, I had Marcus deliver a copy of our pre-divorce financial audit to Julian's firm. It included a chart highlighting how he funneled firm money into a private joint fund with Camilla, a clear violation of ethics policy. 2 hours later, Julian was put on administrative leave. By the end of the week, he was asked to resign to protect the firm's reputation. He tried to spin it as a sabbatical. But word got out. They always do in Boston. Especially when the whispers come from the partners themselves. Camilla, now out of work and out of options, called me. Yes. She actually called me. My phone rang at 11:17 p.m. The number was familiar now. I answered. Silence on the other end. "Elena," she finally said, voice hoarse, "I just wanted to say. You're sorry." I cut her off. She exhaled, broken. "You destroyed my life." I stared at the night outside my window. "No, Camilla. I exposed it. You did the rest yourself." She started crying. I hung up. I didn't feel triumphant. Not in that moment. Just quiet. The next day, Marcus texted. "She moved out of Julian's apartment. Looks like the princess lost her castle." That weekend, I visited the main lake house. Alone. I stood in the doorway of the master bedroom, where Julian once kissed my shoulder and said, "This is forever." I let the memory play out, and then I ripped it apart. I packed every reminder of him into boxes and hired a team to redesign the interior. A full reset. Not for him. For me. Back in the city, Lena met me for dinner. "You know she's talking about suing, right?" she said between bites of duck confit. "She won't," I replied. "She has nothing. If she drags this into court, her entire history will become public record. Her best-case scenario is to disappear quietly and pray no one else connects the dots." "You're scary," Lena said with a grin. I raised my glass. "No. I'm just awake." As we toasted, I got a text from Tessa, my attorney. "Julian's settlement team has surrendered on all key demands. You're getting everything. He's even waiving asset negotiation. Must be trying to protect his bar license." Good. Let him try. Let him think that if he gave me what I wanted, I'd stop. But it was never about the house. Or the money. Or even the titles. It was about power. It was about showing the world, and myself, that no one would ever break me again. Camilla tried to steal my life. Julian tried to erase me. But I rewrote the script. And they were now living in the footnotes. I was just getting started. After the dust of the first strikes began to settle, I stood at the edge of something deeper, something messier. The legal war was moving in my favor, the reputation-scorched earth was already smoking behind me, and Julian and Camilla were unraveling faster than even I anticipated. But inside, I was still cracked. Because revenge, no matter how satisfying, doesn't fill the silence. That's when I made an appointment with Dr. Eleanor Vance, a therapist I hadn't seen in over a year. Back then, I had come to her with the beginnings of marital strain. Little flickers of suspicion. Emotional distance. Sleepless nights and growing doubts. Elena, she said, when I walked into her office, I didn't expect to see you again so soon. I almost didn't come, I replied, sinking into the chair. But I need to say everything I haven't said to anyone else. And not be judged for it. She nodded gently. Then let's start there. I told her about the midnight message. About Camilla's arrogance. Julian's betrayal. The strategic fire I'd lit beneath their feet. And how every small win came with an unexpected aftertaste, like champagne with a hint of blood. Do you feel guilt? She asked, after a long pause. No, I said. I feel focus. But that scares me more. Why? Because I'm not sure who I'm becoming. Dr. Vance didn't offer affirmations or apologies. She offered reflection. Quiet space. And for the first time, I began to understand that revenge wasn't about who I hated, it was about who I refused to become again. Weak. Overlooked. Silenced. That night, I journaled for 3 hours straight. Not about them. About me. And the next morning, I made a decision. I would stage one final trap. Not just to end this war, but to cauterize the wound. Julian and Camilla still had one card left, the illusion of control. Despite everything, they hadn't publicly acknowledged the affair. Julian still had friends who whispered maybe it was all a misunderstanding. Camilla still had connections who called it jealous ex-drama. They needed to be unmasked. By their own hand. And I had just the plan. Marcus helped me find the perfect venue, a secluded cabin in Vermont that Julian and I used to rent in the fall. I still held the reservation under my name, one he wouldn't expect me to remember. I used a burner phone to send Camilla a text from an anonymous number. Weekend getaway. No more hiding. You and Julian deserve to celebrate somewhere private. This cabin is ours now. I included the address, the dates, and a small detail only Julian would recognize. The key was taped under the third stone on the porch. They took the bait. I watched via live drone feed. Marcus had installed hidden cameras earlier that day. The footage was clear, Julian and Camilla arriving late Friday night, wine bottles in hand, kissing on the deck like they hadn't just ruined 2 lives. But this time, they weren't alone. Because Derek, Camilla's former fiancé, had joined me in the plan. He had reached out after seeing the Beacon Women article. He was angry, humiliated, and ready to play his part. We arranged for him to arrive the next morning with a photographer friend. He didn't knock. He walked in, cameras blazing. What the hell is this? Julian shouted, half-dressed. Derek's voice was cool. Just getting what I paid for, Camilla. She froze. I wanted to see what betrayal looks like in natural light, he added. You two make a stunning disaster. The photos went viral within hours. By Sunday evening, Boston's legal community was buzzing. The woman who once claimed to be the next Gloria Allred was now trending on gossip blogs as Boston's homewrecker. Julian tried to salvage his image with a statement. It was bland. Vague. A pathetic attempt at damage control. Too late. His name was now a cautionary tale in firm-wide ethics seminars. Camilla's remaining job interviews were cancelled. I watched it all unfold from the quiet of my living room, sipping tea. Not smiling. Not laughing. Just breathing. Because for the first time in weeks, I wasn't reacting. I was just watching the collapse from a safe, protected distance. Later that night, I returned to Dr. Vance. I told her everything. How do you feel? She asked. Empty, I said. But also, clean. She nodded. Closure often feels quiet. Not victorious. Then I think I found it. But she leaned forward, eyes kind. Be careful, Elena. Sometimes revenge tricks us into thinking we've healed when all we've done is outmaneuver our pain. I went home thinking about that. And for the first time in this entire war, I started to think about what came after. Not who I had been. Not who they made me. But who I was willing to become next. Because the revenge was almost over. And the rebuilding was about to begin. I signed the divorce papers on a Thursday. It was raining. I remember because Julian always said rain made him feel melancholic, like a French film, and yet when he walked into the mediation room, he didn't look poetic. He looked hollow. He barely met my eyes. His lawyer, a red-faced man who looked like a deflated balloon in a suit, sat beside him, flipping through paperwork like he already knew how this would end. I, on the other hand, came with Tessa Nguyen. Sharp, immovable, and armed with a stack of documentation so thorough it could have doubled as a weapon. The room was silent for a long time as Julian skimmed the numbers. House. Mine. Main property. Mine. Luxury SUV. Mine. Retirement accounts, stocks, even the crypto wallet I had traced through Marcus and a forensic accountant. Split, but at an 80 to 20 margin. He blinked hard when he saw the clause about the professional ethics complaint still under review. You really want to destroy me, don't you? He said finally, his voice low. I met his gaze. No, Julian. I just want you to understand what it feels like to lose something you thought you could control. His signature was barely legible. His hands shook. But he signed. It was over. Or, at least, that chapter was. Afterward, Tessa and I walked out into the rain. She handed me a sealed copy of the final decree, her tone clinical. You're now, legally, Elena Moreau. Sole owner of all joint assets. Free and clear. Free and clear. Strange how those two words could sting as much as they soothed. Later that day, I sat alone in the penthouse Julian once insisted on buying, because it made us look serious. Funny, he was the least serious man I'd ever met. I poured myself a glass of red wine and stared out the window as the city lit up below me. I thought about the woman I had been, obedient, forgiving, patient to a fault. The kind of woman who filled the fridge with his favorite snacks, who memorized his court calendar so she wouldn't text during depositions. I had loved him in microscopic, invisible ways. And he had burned it all for one night of ego. But I didn't cry. Instead, I picked up my phone and made one final financial transfer, a small amount, into a trust for a future I hadn't fully imagined yet. I named it Phoenix. It was symbolic. But it was also practical. Because I had no intention of letting this victory turn to rot. I wouldn't sit in this tower of spoils like some bitter queen ruling over ash. That weekend, Lena took me to a women's wellness retreat in the Berkshires. We didn't talk about Julian. We barely talked at all. We hiked. Ate clean. Slept early. At one point, I sat alone on a wooden deck in the middle of the forest and wrote a letter I would never send. Julian. You broke me in a way only someone I loved could. But I rebuilt myself in a way you never imagined. Not to win. But because I refused to stay small. You can have the last word. I already have the last life. Elena ***. When I returned to Boston, I began reimagining what home meant. I kept the penthouse but stripped it of everything we bought together. The art. The linens. The silver cocktail shaker set he loved. All gone. In their place, I added pieces that told a new story. A painting from a black female artist in Atlanta. Books stacked on the floor, not for display, but for comfort. A vintage record player that played Ella Fitzgerald while I cooked barefoot on Sundays. It didn't feel like revenge anymore. It felt like reclamation. But Camilla's name re-emerged one more time, unexpectedly. Harper from Beacon Women called to say that Camilla had attempted to pitch a redemption piece, how one woman survived public shame and reinvented herself. "Are you okay if we run it?" Harper asked. "She's not naming you, but the subtext is obvious." I paused. Then said, "Let her tell her story. She'll still have to live with the truth." Because I had realized something powerful. Revenge ends when you stop needing to be the one who delivers it. Sometimes, the most devastating consequence is watching your enemy try to clean up a mess they swore they never made. Camilla's article came out 2 weeks later. It was pathetic. A cloying, glossy attempt at self-pity disguised as empowerment. Comments were brutal. No one bought the act. And I barely blinked. I was in Florence by then. Alone. Painting. Writing. Relearning joy in the shadows of old cathedrals. One evening, I sat at a cafe on the Arno, sketching strangers, and a young American tourist beside me asked, "Are you an artist?" I smiled, surprised by the word. "Not yet," I said. "But maybe." He didn't press. Just smiled back. I realized then that I had room in my life again. Not necessarily for another man, but for softness. For curiosity. For pleasure that wasn't laced with control. Julian had taken many things from me. But not everything. And certainly not the parts one had now found again. As the sun dipped behind the Duomo, I raised my glass to no one in particular. To endings. To beginnings. To becoming. I didn't expect the envelope. It was cream-colored, thick, and bore no return address. When I pulled it from my mailbox on a quiet Wednesday afternoon, I assumed it was another real estate pitch or a high-end bridal catalog sent to the wrong unit. But when I opened it, I froze. Inside was an invitation, handwritten in delicate calligraphy, sealed in gold foil. "You are cordially invited to the wedding of Camilla Torres and Vincent Lowell." Vincent Lowell. Not Julian. A different man. A wealthy one. A name I recognized from Boston's financial elite. The kind of man who attended museum galas and chaired foundations. Old money, well-bred, quiet power. Camilla had pivoted. She'd gone from scandal to social climbing in under a year. For a moment, I laughed. It was absurd. Comedic, even. After everything, the humiliation, the career collapse, the media fallout, she was walking down another aisle. But then I noticed something else. The venue. The Whitford estate. The same private estate Julian and I had once considered for our wedding, before settling on something more modest. It was grand, historic, the kind of place you chose when you wanted to make a statement. I read the invitation again. Not just, "You are invited," but specifically addressed to me. To Elena Moreau, in perfectly penned ink. It wasn't a mistake. Camilla wanted me to see this. To witness her reinvention. Her rebound. Her win. And in a twisted way, I understood the move. When revenge fails, some people reach for reinvention, not to heal, but to be seen again. To pretend they were never knocked down. But sending that invitation was a mistake. Because it triggered something in me I thought was long gone. Not rage. Not grief. Clarity. This wasn't about crashing the wedding. It was about ending the war. Cleanly. Publicly. With finality. 3 weeks later, I arrived at the Whitford estate alone. I wore black, not mourning, not malice. Just simplicity. Strength. A sleeveless column gown that flowed like ink and cut like glass. The estate was beautiful, annoyingly so. Twinkle lights danced in the trees. Classical music floated through the garden. Waiters in white gloves offered champagne. And there was Camilla, radiant in white, her smile painted on like a magazine cover. She spotted me instantly. Her eyes flickered with recognition, surprise, then something she tried to bury beneath social grace. "Elena," she said, approaching with an almost polite smile. "I wasn't sure you'd come." "Then why send the invitation?" I replied, coolly. She laughed, too lightly. "Closure, I suppose." "No," I said, stepping closer. "Control." Her smile faltered. "You wanted to show me something," I continued. "That you weren't broken. That you still had value. But Camilla, this isn't a win. This is camouflage." She stiffened. "You're wrong. I rebuilt everything." "No," I said, my voice soft. "You replaced everything. That's not the same." We stood there in silence for a moment. Behind her, guests mingled, oblivious. Vincent was laughing with a banker, holding a glass of scotch. "You hurt a lot of people," I added. "Not just me. You weaponized your ambition. And now you're dressing it in pearls and vows." She bristled. "I paid for what I did." "Not to me, you haven't." Then I handed her a thin envelope. Inside was a letter. No threats. No demands. Just truth. It detailed the lives she stepped over. The secrets Marcus had uncovered that I never released. The people she blackmailed for silence. The paralegal she forced out of work. And my note at the bottom. "I chose not to destroy you. You did that well enough on your own. But don't mistake my silence for weakness. This is your final pass. Use it wisely." She paled. I turned to leave. But before I stepped away, I added, "Congratulations. I hope this marriage is real. Because the next time you build your life on someone else's ruin, you might not be so lucky." Then I walked out. I didn't look back. The next day, I flew to Morocco. It wasn't planned. I booked the ticket from the back seat of the cab as I left the estate. I needed to see somewhere ancient. Somewhere that reminded me that time erodes everything, even heartbreak. I spent 2 weeks in the red sandstone alleys of Marrakesh, drinking mint tea, wandering souks, watching calligraphy artists etch poetry into parchment. And there, in the middle of that chaotic, beautiful city, I let go. Not because Camilla deserved forgiveness. But because I deserved freedom. Months later, I heard rumors. Camilla's marriage lasted 6 weeks. Vincent discovered inconsistencies in her business investments, quiet ones, but enough to back away. The wedding photos disappeared from social media. Her name, once buzzing again, returned to silence. I didn't feel victorious. I felt complete. Because the truth always returns. Like a tide. Like a whisper. Like justice delayed but never denied. And I no longer needed to fight. I had nothing to prove. Because I had already won. And now, finally, I was ready to begin again. 6 months after the wedding that never truly happened, I stood barefoot on the balcony of a small villa in Santorini, staring at a sea so blue it hurt to look at. The island was quiet in the off-season. The tourists were gone. The air smelled of salt and lemon, and for once, my thoughts weren't about Julian, or Camilla, or everything they'd taken. They were about me. My own name sounded different now. Not Elena Moreau, the betrayed wife. But Elena, just. Elena. No longer someone reacting. No longer someone recovering. Just a woman waking up. It had taken time. Too much, maybe. But grief, rage, and vengeance, they move through you like storms, and no one tells you how many walls they'll tear down before the sky clears. I had spent the last few months in motion. Paris. Marrakesh. Kyoto. I filled notebooks with thoughts I never shared. Painted scenes of strangers I would never meet again. Laughed in small, beautiful ways, slowly at first, then more freely. And I kept my promise. I never looked them up. I didn't read the gossip columns anymore. I didn't ask Marcus to track anything. I didn't scroll Instagram searching for clues. Because I no longer cared where they were. They were ash. I was fire. One morning in Santorini, while sipping strong coffee and sketching the sea, a woman approached my table. Her name was Iris, a sculptor from Lisbon. She asked if she could sit. I nodded. She didn't ask where I was from. She didn't ask why I traveled alone. Instead, she said, "Your hands look like they've held grief." I stared at them, startled. Pale, strong, scarred in places I hadn't noticed. Have they? I asked. She smiled softly. But they also look like they built something after. We spent the day walking the cliffs, exchanging stories without timelines. She told me about her failed exhibitions, the lover who left her for a gallery owner, and the moment she smashed an entire collection of her own work because someone said it was too emotional. That night, she asked if I had ever destroyed something on purpose. I paused. No, I said. But I've watched people destroy themselves while I stood still. She raised her glass. Sometimes that's the most merciful form of vengeance. When I returned to Boston weeks later, I didn't move back into the penthouse. I sold it. Not out of bitterness. It was simply no longer mine. It had belonged to the woman who still believed Julian loved her. Who used to whisper his name like it was a safety rope. I bought a brownstone in Beacon Hill instead, modest, sunlit, with uneven floors and a clawfoot bathtub older than the city itself. I painted every room myself. Chose soft rugs and heavy curtains. Filled it with plants I wasn't sure I could keep alive. It became a sanctuary. I also reopened my consulting firm, quietly. No splashy LinkedIn posts. No dramatic announcements. Just a handful of hand-picked clients, most of them women rebuilding after collapse. That's how I met Naomi Chin, a tech founder whose co-CEO tried to edge her out just before their Series B raise. She walked into my office shaking with shame. By the end of our first session, she walked out with a plan. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. I smiled. Just win. Helping her helped me. Because when you've walked through fire, your voice changes. You don't just teach strategy. You teach survival. And survival isn't loud. It's steady. It's sacred. One evening, months later, I received a package. No sender listed. Inside was a letter. Handwritten. No name, but I knew the handwriting. Julian. It was brief. Elena. I'm sorry. Not because of what happened. But because you deserved a version of me that never existed. I hope the version of you that came after is someone you love more than the one I tried to shape. J*****. I sat with it for a long time. No tears came. I didn't frame it. I didn't rip it up. I burned it. Quietly. Ritualistically. In the fireplace of my new home. And I watched the ash rise. I'm not healed. Not fully. Healing isn't linear. Some nights I still wake up with phantom pain. I still flinch when someone speaks too softly, because that's how Julian used to lie. But I no longer confuse closure with apology. I no longer need someone to say, "You were right." Because I am living the proof. They tried to turn me into rubble. But rubble is where cathedrals begin. I built a new self from pieces they never saw. And now, when I walk into rooms, I don't look for exits. I look for thrones. Not to conquer, but to belong to. Because I'm not the woman who got cheated on. I'm the woman who rose. The woman who walked through a fire lit by others and came out crowned in flame. Not angry. Not vindictive. Just alive. Unapologetically. And that, in the end, was the greatest revenge of all. It started with a message. A short, polite email from a college student named Raina Patel, who had read about my firm in a podcast transcript online. She was 21, brilliant, and heartbroken. Her boyfriend had stolen her app prototype and pitched it as his own in a startup incubator. "I know you help women rebuild," she wrote. "I just don't know how to start." I stared at her message for a long time. Because I saw myself in her, not in the details, but in the ache. In that moment where everything you've worked for is ripped from your hands by someone who smiled while doing it. That brutal mix of betrayal and self-doubt, of shame and rage. I emailed her back with a single line. "Come by the office. Let's begin." And that's how the Ember Collective was born. It started with Raina, but within 3 months, we had over 30 women, all rebuilding from theft, betrayal, collapse. Some had lost companies, others marriages, some simply their voices. They didn't come for therapy. They came for tools. For strategies. For fire. We taught them how to fight back, legally, financially, emotionally. We trained them to hold pens like swords, walk into courtrooms like queens, and write emails that made predators sweat. And most importantly, we taught them how to protect what they built, so no one could take it again. One woman called us a sanctuary for survivors who refused to stay quiet. I liked that. On the 1-year anniversary of my divorce, I threw a party. Not to celebrate the end, but to honor the woman who clawed her way out. No fancy venue. No gala tables. Just my Beacon Hill brownstone, filled with music and mismatched candles, and the 30 women who made up the first core of Ember. They brought wine and stories. Some cried. Some laughed so hard they spilled on the rugs. One woman stood up and read a poem she wrote in the back of a courtroom while waiting for her restraining order to be approved. There was no pity in the room. Only power. Only presence. And when Raina took my hand and whispered, "You changed everything for me," I shook my head. "No, love. You changed yourself." I just turned on the light. I never thought revenge would lead me here. Not to peace. Not to purpose. Not to joy. But looking back, I realize it wasn't the fire that saved me. It was what I built in the ashes. Camilla. I hadn't heard her name in nearly a year. Julian had disappeared from the Boston circuit entirely. Rumor had it he moved west, changed firms, tried to rebrand. But truth has a memory. It follows people like a shadow. I didn't follow. Because my story no longer had room for ghosts. One morning, I walked past a bookstore in Back Bay. In the window, I saw a new memoir. Fireproof: How I Reclaimed My Life After the Fall. The author: Elena Moreau. I had almost forgotten. My agent had insisted I publish under my real name. "You don't hide from the past," she'd said. "You stare it down." The book was never about Julian. Or Camilla. They were just the opening scene. The real story was about what happens when a woman decides her story isn't over just because someone else walked away. It was raw, unflinching, and mine. That morning, a teenage girl walked into the shop and picked it up. She didn't recognize me through the window. But I saw her flip to the first page and smile. And for the first time, I felt what legacy actually meant. Not success. Not revenge. But impact. A lighthouse you build from your wreckage. Now, when I'm asked what I do, I don't say, financial strategist. I say, I help women rise. Because I do. Every day. Not for vengeance anymore. But for the kind of justice that rebuilds, quietly, fiercely, and forever. And the woman I used to be. She didn't die in that betrayal. She transformed. Into something sharp. Something luminous. Something unforgettable. She became me. And I'm proud of her. There's a drawer in my house I never open. It sits in the corner of my home office, beneath a stack of old sketch pads and books with spines cracked from overuse. Inside that drawer are remnants of a past life. A dried corsage from my wedding. The first birthday card Julian ever gave me, scrawled with a promise he never kept. A folded photo of us at Lake Como, he smiling, arms wrapped around me, and I remember how safe I once felt in that lie. Sometimes, when the wind howls against the windows and loneliness creeps in through the floorboards, I sit near that drawer. I don't open it. But I remember what's inside. Not to mourn it. To honor it. Because healing isn't erasure. It's integration. After the launch of the Ember Collective, my life filled with rhythm again. Mornings spent consulting with women in rooms once filled with legal threats. Afternoons writing columns about power, trust, and rebuilding. Evenings making dinner alone, barefoot with jazz humming in the background, savoring the kind of silence that once terrified me. And once a week, I'd return to Dr. Eleanora Vance. Not because I was broken. But because even strong women need mirrors that don't distort. One evening, I told her something I hadn't said out loud before. I'm scared that everything I've built came from pain. She looked at me calmly. Then you're proof that pain isn't the ending. It's the raw material. I thought about that as I walked home through the autumn air, leaves crunching beneath my boots. I passed couples holding hands, joggers with headphones, and a little girl skipping ahead of her mom. They didn't know me. But I knew myself. And that was more than enough. Julian emailed me again. This time it wasn't an apology. It was an update. He'd joined a nonprofit firm in Colorado. Trying to do work that matters now, he wrote. I don't expect forgiveness. Just wanted you to know I'm trying. I didn't reply. Not because I was angry. But because not every ending needs a reply. Camilla resurfaced, briefly. A journalist messaged me for comment. Camilla was the keynote at a private seminar for women in crisis recovery. I nearly laughed. The irony was too thick. But I declined to speak. Because people always reveal themselves eventually. And those who build on lies are always busy rebuilding. I wasn't interested in demolition anymore. One afternoon, I visited my parents' house. My mother still kept my high school debate trophies in the hallway, next to childhood photos. We sat on the porch with coffee, and she finally asked, "Do you think he ever loved you?" I smiled gently. I think he loved the version of me who never questioned him. My father, silent as always, nodded once. That was enough. Before I left, my mother handed me something I'd forgotten, a notebook I kept as a teenager. It was filled with ideas for a future business, sketches for a boutique firm helping women negotiate confidently. I was 17. I had forgotten that version of me ever existed. And there she was, in ink, bright-eyed, hungry, and whole. Not born from betrayal. But built from ambition. I cried in the car for the first time in months. Not because I was sad. Because I remembered. I remembered that I didn't rise from Julian or Camilla or court filings. I rose from Elena. From the girl who knew her worth before anyone ever tried to take it. I framed one page of that notebook and hung it above my desk. It reads, in sloppy teenage handwriting. You are allowed to take up space. Sometimes I stare at it before a meeting. Sometimes I recite it when I sit across from CEOs who still flinch at women who speak too clearly. Because power isn't loud. It's consistent. It's knowing. It's earned. And it's mine now. The drawer in my office remains closed. I don't throw away what's inside. But I no longer let it define me. What I kept was the fire. What I let go was the burn. What remains is the woman who stepped through it all, and came out shining. Not for anyone else. For herself. It was a cloudy morning when I stood on the TEDx stage in San Francisco. The lights were soft but focused. The red dot beneath my heels reminded me of a promise I made to myself nearly 2 years ago, to never let my story be defined by someone else's betrayal. The audience was quiet, hundreds of strangers watching me breathe, watching me exist. I'm not here because I was cheated on, I began. I'm here because I refuse to stay silent. No teleprompter. No notes. Just memory, scars, and the steady cadence of truth. I told them about the midnight text. The woman who mocked me. The husband who discarded me like a season he outgrew. And I told them what I did with the ashes. They gasped at the legal maneuvering. They leaned forward when I described watching Camilla's empire collapse from the quiet of my living room. But the moment that changed the room was softer. When you are betrayed, I said, you face 2 choices. Let it define you. Or let it refine you. Silence. Breathless, reverent. I chose the latter. And what I've learned is this, revenge might look like victory. But healing. Healing is sovereignty. It's when you no longer need to win to feel whole. Afterward, the standing ovation lasted longer than my speech. Women approached me in the lobby with trembling hands and shining eyes. I thought I was the only one. You said everything I couldn't say in court. My sister needed this. I held their hands. Listened to their voices. And felt something strange and beautiful. Peace. That night, back in my hotel room, I wrote one final journal entry. The last page in the notebook I started the night I received that life-shattering text from Camilla Torres. I didn't write about Julian. I didn't write about the court. I wrote about my first apartment after college. The balcony with a rusted railing. The dog-eared books I carried from place to place like scripture. The girl who didn't yet know heartbreak, but already knew her power. She had always been there. Not waiting to be born, but waiting to be remembered. I used to think I was forged by what broke me. Now I know the truth. I was forged by what I chose to build after. In time, I stopped talking about Julian at all. He faded into the back chapters, a name in the footnotes of a life that had grown too big to be confined by one man's failure. Camilla. Last I heard, she was doing real estate seminars in Florida, selling confidence like a repackaged lie. Maybe she's happy. Maybe she's not. I don't care. Because that chapter closed. And I didn't just turn the page. I wrote a new book. The Amber Collective expanded. Raina now runs the West Coast division. Naomi published her own book. One of our members made the Forbes 30 under 30. They still text me before big meetings. Sometimes just one word, torch. Because we don't wait to be given light anymore. We carry fire. As for me, I live in a home filled with music and silence in perfect balance. I travel not to escape but to discover. I no longer need a partner to feel anchored. But if someone someday wants to walk beside me, they'll meet a woman who will never shrink again. I am still writing. Still building. Still rising. Because the story was never theirs. It was always mine. I just had to reclaim the pen. In the end, I am not defined by what I lost. I am remembered by what I dared to become. Not a victim. Not a villain. But a voice. A fire. A woman who rebuilt herself not from ruin, but from resolve. And when they whisper about me now, I hope they say, she didn't just survive. She rewrote the ending. And made it unforgettable.